A peaceful funeral was suddenly thrown into chaos when the loyal dog of the deceased began barking furiously in front of the casket. Stranger still, when a man asked the reason behind it, the priest's confused expression and unusual behavior left the crowd stunned. Was something being hidden? The unfolding story would reveal chilling secrets, taking you through a roller coaster of unforgettable emotions. Stay tuned, for what lies ahead is nothing like you'd expect. If you enjoy meaningful tales filled with twists and surprises, hit like and subscribe to never miss the next installment. The story begins. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by an unexpected sound. It was Max, the loyal dog of Grace. Max wasn't just an ordinary dog. He was always by Grace's side, inseparable from her in life. Now, amidst the crowd, his eyes were fixed on the casket, his barking growing louder and more insistent. Everyone turned to look at each other, their expressions a mixture of surprise and unease. What is it seeing? Some whispered, their voices barely audible, as though afraid of disturbing the eerie atmosphere. A few people began to shift uneasily, their eyes glued to Max's strange behavior. Yet, Max stood his ground, his barking intensifying as if trying to deliver a warning. In the village, everyone knew of Max's remarkable intelligence, not just for his unique connection to people, but for his almost supernatural sensitivity to things beyond human perception. The children at the funeral shivered, recalling spine-chilling tales they'd heard about dogs, creatures believed to see things that eluded human understanding. What is Max trying to tell us? No one could speak the words aloud, but the fear was evident in their eyes. Max's actions seemed to scream that something wasn't right. Here and now, several adults stepped forward, cautiously trying to soothe Max with gentle strokes, hoping to calm him. But the barking didn't cease. His gaze remained unwavering, locked onto the casket. The firmness in his stance and the urgency in his voice began to unsettle even the most skeptical among them. The air was thick with a mix of curiosity and tension. Father Daniel, standing closest to the casket, became acutely aware that all eyes were now on him and Max struggling to maintain his composure. He took a deep breath and raised a hand to signal for quiet. Yet, Max's relentless barking echoed through the church, as if the dog was determined to warn everyone of some unseen, terrible truth. With a forced and uneasy smile, Father Daniel tried to mask his growing apprehension. He couldn't shake the feeling that something deeply unusual was unfolding. Max's intense gaze seemed to demand that no one ignore the reality that lay before them. Slowly, Father Daniel approached Max, his voice soft but measured. "Come now, Max, calm down. Everything's fine." But even as he spoke, Max didn't stop. The barking continued, sharp and insistent, as though the dog was shouting a warning no one could comprehend. Cautiously, Father Daniel extended a hand toward Max, his eyes locked on the dog's unwavering stare. He moved as if trying to soothe the animal, but Max backed away, letting out a low, guttural growl. His gaze never wavered from the casket. Beads of sweat formed on Father Daniel's forehead. He quickly wiped them away, glancing nervously at the crowd. Everyone in the church was now intently focused on his every move. "It's just a dog," he said with a weak, trembling laugh, trying to bring the congregation's attention back to the service. Yet, deep down, even Father Daniel couldn't ignore the creeping dread that something was amiss, something that Max seemed desperate to alert them to. Some in the crowd began to notice how Father Daniel avoided looking directly at the casket, as though he, too, feared seeing whatever it was that Max might be sensing. "Does he know something?" An elderly woman whispered to her companion, her voice tinged with suspicion. The tension in the church thickened. A cold draft swept through the room, causing several attendees to shiver, as though something invisible and sinister had brushed past them. The children, both curious and frightened, inched closer to their parents, clutching their hands tightly. Realizing that unease was spreading, Father Daniel raised his voice, now firm and commanding. "Someone please take this dog outside." But Max refused to budge. He stood his ground, barking with unrelenting resolve. His determined gaze and unyielding stance seemed to convey an urgent message, one that no one could yet decipher. The atmosphere in the church grew heavier with every passing moment. Whispers and glances circulated among the mourners, their unease escalating. What was Max trying to say? And why did Father Daniel seem just as unsettled as the rest of them? Amid the crowd, a man who seemed out of place stood at an ideal spot to observe the unfolding events. His name was Ethan, a newcomer to the village whom few knew much about. Strangely, he appeared to have a peculiar fondness for Grace, though the two had never been particularly close. Ethan possessed a sharp eye for detail and an intense passion for unraveling mysteries. Watching Max's unusual behavior, he quickly sensed that something was amiss. Rising slowly from his seat, he adjusted his coat and began making his way toward the dog. All eyes shifted to Ethan, their expressions a blend of curiosity and skepticism, eager to see what the enigmatic man might do. "Hello, little friend." Ethan knelt beside Max, his voice calm and soothing. "What are you trying to show us?" Hearing Ethan's voice, Max paused his barking, his intelligent, piercing eyes meeting the man's with a mix of caution and hope, as if pleading for assistance. Ethan felt the urgency in Max's gaze. Slowly, he turned his head in the direction the dog had been staring, the casket. A shiver ran down Ethan's spine, an unshakable sense that some unseen force was compelling him to uncover the truth hidden in this place. Whispers rippled through the church once more, the congregation growing increasingly uneasy and intrigued. "Leave the dog alone," a man barked gruffly, seemingly desperate to break the tension. But Ethan shook his head, his expression firm. "I think Max is trying to tell us something," he said with quiet determination. Turning his focus back to the casket, Ethan's voice took on a contemplative tone. "And perhaps we ought to listen." Taking another cautious step closer to Max, Ethan knelt again, speaking in a low, steady voice. "Come on, boy. Show me what's troubling you." Max wagged his tail ever so slightly, as though acknowledging that Ethan was there to help. The dog's barking ceased, replaced by a low whine as he lowered his head to sniff the ground. Step by careful step, Max moved toward the casket, as if leading the way to a secret only he could sense. As Ethan and Max approached the casket, murmurs swept through the crowd. Some began recalling old legends about animals and their supposed sixth sense, tales of dogs and cats detecting unseen presences, sensing danger, or even foretelling supernatural events beyond human perception. Max's peculiar behavior had unsettled everyone. The churchgoers exchanged nervous glances as Ethan spoke, his tone thoughtful yet foreboding. "Maybe he's sensing something we can't see." The air in the church grew heavier, the weight of collective anxiety pressing down on everyone. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of fabric seemed magnified in the oppressive silence. The congregation watched with bated breath, their unease intensifying as Max inched closer to the casket, his every move a testament to his determination to unveil the hidden truth. Unspoken questions hung heavy in the air. Was Max seeing something supernatural? Or was there a deeper mystery surrounding Grace's death? Father Daniel, visibly uncomfortable, realized the situation had spiraled out of control. He took a deep breath, adjusted his robe, and stepped to the center of the church, raising his hand to command attention. "Everyone, please remain calm," he said loudly, his voice attempting to project authority, but trembling just enough to betray the anxiety underneath. "We are here to honor Grace, someone we all loved dearly." His sharp gaze flicked toward Ethan, who stood unwavering beside Max, seemingly locked in an unspoken dialogue with the dog. Father Daniel continued, this time louder, his tone firmer. "It is highly inappropriate for anyone to cause such a disturbance at a moment as sensitive as this." Some in the congregation nodded in agreement, but others exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions tinged with doubt and curiosity. Why was Father Daniel so tense? Why was he so desperate to end this scene? Pointing directly at Ethan, Father Daniel's voice took on a harder edge. "What you're doing is disrespectful to Grace." His voice grew sharper, almost accusatory, as he raised it even further. "Leave that dog alone and stop distracting everyone with this nonsense." Ethan, feeling the weight of Father Daniel's words, stood firm. Something about the priest's urgency, his need to quash the situation so quickly, only deepened Ethan's suspicions. Beside him, Max let out a low growl, as if the dog, too, disapproved of Father Daniel's attitude. Sensing he was losing control, Father Daniel shifted tactics, his tone becoming almost pleading. Please, everyone, don't let Grace's memory be tarnished by actions like this. Let us return to our purpose here, to pray for her soul and her eternal rest. But for many in the crowd, peace seemed more elusive than ever. Though Father Daniel's words sought to calm, the beads of sweat forming on his forehead and the subtle tremor in his hands told a different story altogether. A heavy silence blanketed the room, thick with unspoken tension. All eyes were on Ethan, breathless with anticipation. What would he do next? Aware of Father Daniel's unease and his desperate attempts to end the situation, Ethan made a decision. He would voice the question that everyone else was too afraid to ask. Didn't falter. Standing just outside the church doors, Ethan bent down and looked into Max's eyes, as though seeking guidance from the dog that had been the catalyst for this strange unraveling. The tension in his chest was heavy, but he could feel that he was on the verge of uncovering something significant, a truth buried beneath layers of silence and fear. Inside the church, the murmurs persisted, rising and falling like waves. Some members of the congregation whispered in hushed tones, their curiosity overpowering their discomfort. Others shook their heads, trying to dismiss Ethan's audacious confrontation as baseless drama. Yet a few exchanged worried glances, their unease echoing in the stillness that followed. Father Daniel, meanwhile, stood frozen near the altar, his face a mask of anger and barely concealed panic. His hand gripped the edge of the lectern tightly, knuckles white, as he stared after Ethan and Max for a brief moment. His lips moved as if to say something more, but no words came out. Outside, Ethan straightened up and exhaled deeply, his breath forming faint clouds in the cold air. He glanced back at the church and the faces still visible through the windows, then whispered to himself, "Something's not right. I can feel it." Max wagged his tail slightly, his demeanor calmer now but still alert, his ears twitching as if tuned to an inaudible signal. Encouraged by the dog's behavior, Ethan began walking, his pace steady but purposeful. Ethan's thoughts swirled as he made his way down the quiet village path, the eerie silence of the afternoon pressing down on him. Questions flooded his mind. Why had Father Daniel reacted so defensively? Why was Grace alone at the time of her death? And why had the priest been the first to find her? What could Max have sensed that no one else could? The deeper he delved into the possibilities, the clearer it became that Grace's death wasn't as simple as everyone had been led to believe. Later that evening, Ethan sat at the small desk in his rented cottage, surrounded by the flickering light of a single lamp. In front of him lay an old journal he'd found while settling into the village. It belonged to Grace, containing notes about her daily life, her thoughts, and something more cryptic, mentions of a dark presence and suspicions about someone she trusted. His heart raced as he scanned the pages, the pieces of a puzzle beginning to form. With Max lying at his feet, the loyal dog occasionally lifting his head to listen to the faint sounds outside, Ethan vowed silently, "I'll find out the truth, Grace. Whatever they're hiding, I'll uncover it." The night stretched on, the air growing colder, but the fire of determination burned brighter in Ethan's chest. Ethan couldn't simply walk away and leave it all behind. A dark and oppressive shadow surrounded Grace's death, and a powerful drive within him refused to let him stop. Max, sensing the same unease, wagged his tail slightly, a sign of readiness, as if the dog, too, was prepared to confront whatever lay ahead. "Come on, buddy," Ethan whispered to Max. "I think we've got a lot to uncover." With that resolve, the two began their investigation, venturing into the old cemetery. The weathered trees stood like silent sentinels among the ancient graves, their bare branches swaying gently in the cold wind. Fallen leaves swirled in the air, their rustling resembling hushed whispers. The eerie silence only deepened Ethan's suspicion that something significant was hidden here. Max sniffed the ground with intense focus, as though searching for something very specific. The dog's near-supernatural intuition guided their path, giving Ethan confidence in their direction. The first step, Ethan realized, was to learn more about Grace's life. He made his way to her modest stone cottage, nestled at the edge of the forest. The garden surrounding it was overgrown and wild, a testament to how long it had been neglected. When Ethan arrived, he noticed the door was unlocked. It felt deliberate, as if someone had left in a hurry, leaving more questions than answers in their wake. Stepping inside, Ethan shivered as a chill ran down his spine. The house was thick with dust, but certain items appeared recently disturbed. Max stood beside him, sniffing the air and the floor with determination. Cautiously, Ethan began searching the house, opening drawers and rummaging through papers and documents. His eyes scanned every corner until he found something intriguing on an old wooden table, a small, unassuming wooden box. Inside, he discovered a collection of letters and photographs, yellowed with age. The letters hinted at a life filled with secrets. As Ethan read through them, he realized that Grace had been involved in mysterious dealings. The letters spoke of clandestine meetings and conversations with outsiders, people unfamiliar to the village. But it was one specific letter that made his heart race. It was handwritten by Grace herself, and it revealed something deeply troubling. In the letter, she mentioned Father Daniel, expressing her discovery of serious wrongdoing on his part. Her words were filled with both fear and urgency, as though she had been on the brink of exposing him before her untimely death. Ethan looked at Max, whose eyes were filled with unease, the dog's body tense as though it, too, sensed the gravity of their discovery. "We're on to something big, Max," Ethan murmured. The cottage felt colder now, the air thick with an unshakable sense of foreboding. Ethan knew they were drawing closer to a dangerous truth, one that someone had worked very hard to keep buried. As Ethan continued his search, his fingers brushed against a small key taped to the back of a framed picture on the wall. "What does this key unlock?" he murmured to himself. Max let out a soft bark, as though encouraging him to press on. Beside the key was a photograph. It showed Grace standing next to Father Daniel, with the church visible in the background. What caught Ethan's attention most was a small metal box in the lower corner of the photograph, an object identical to the one Grace had mentioned in her letters, where she alleged that Father Daniel had hidden money. "We're on the right track, Max," Ethan said, giving the dog an affectionate pat on the head. "If Grace is trying to tell us something." He clenched the small key in his hand, a surge of determination welling up inside him. With Max by his side, he felt certain the truth was within reach. Something about Father Daniel gnawed at him, a suspicion that grew stronger with every clue. Ethan believed the key was a critical piece of the puzzle. "This might be the missing link," he muttered, his gaze fixed with resolve. Holding the key tightly, he decided to return to the center of the village, where their investigation could continue. Though the village appeared peaceful on the surface, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling of a darkness lurking beneath its tranquil facade. He needed to uncover the secrets Grace had been hiding, and what she had discovered about Father Daniel. This thought led him to the village library, a dimly lit and dusty place filled with shelves of old books and ancient documents. Ethan began combing through anything that might connect Grace and Father Daniel to something unusual. After some time, his efforts paid off. He found an old village photo album, its pages brittle with age. Flipping through, he saw images of community events, religious festivals, and eventually several photographs of Grace. One particular picture stopped him cold. It was a photo of Grace standing beside Father Daniel, much like the one he had found earlier. However, this time her expression stood out. There was no trace of joy or comfort. Instead, her face betrayed a deep unease, as though she was concealing a profound fear. What did she discover? Ethan whispered, his mind racing. As he stared at the photograph, a gnawing realization set in. Grace hadn't just stumbled upon a secret. She had uncovered something so dangerous, so incriminating, that it may have cost her everything. "Ethan," glanced down at Max, whose ears twitched as though sensing his owner's unease. "We're getting closer, Max," he said, "and whatever we find next might just change everything." Ethan stared at the photograph, his eyes drawn to a seemingly innocuous detail at the edge of the image. A small metal box, the same box he'd seen in the photo at Grace's home. The realization sent a jolt through him. This box was more than a coincidence. It was a key to unraveling the truth. Fueled by mounting curiosity, Ethan hurried back to Grace's house, determined to follow the trail to its end. At the weathered old home, he resumed his search, combing through the shadows of forgotten corners. Behind a tattered curtain, he stumbled upon a hidden cabinet. Inside, he found something that made his heart race. A small leather-bound journal. It was Grace's diary. Opening it carefully, he skimmed through the pages, each filled with notes that seemed crucial. Max sat beside him, ears pricked, as though sensing the tension thickening in the air. The diary revealed a shocking truth. Grace had uncovered a web of corruption deeply rooted in the church itself. Her words described how Father Daniel had been embezzling funds from the congregation, amassing a vast amount of money for a shadowy purpose. "He's stealing from everyone," Grace had written in one entry, "and using their trust to cover up his crimes." As Ethan turned the pages, a loose envelope fell out. Inside were more photographs, and these deepened the mystery further. In several images, Father Daniel was seen in obscure corners of the church, always with the small metal box in hand. In one particularly chilling photo, he stood next to an old statue inside the church, the box placed beside him as if he were concealing something beneath the sacred figure. A cold shiver ran down Ethan's spine. "This is it," he whispered. Looking at Max, she uncovered everything, and that's why she was in danger. He closed the diary and tucked it under his arm, his resolve hardening. Ethan now knew what he had to do. The box, hidden somewhere in the church, could hold the key to explaining everything. Looking at Max, he found reassurance in the dog's wagging tail and alert stance. It was as if Max, too, felt the weight of their discovery and was ready for the next step. "Let's go, boy," Ethan said, his voice steady with determination. "We've got a big secret to uncover." As they left Grace's home, the full gravity of the situation settled over Ethan. The stakes were higher than he'd imagined. The small village's serene surface was cracking, and what lay beneath was far darker than he'd expected. With Grace's diary clutched tightly, Ethan knew there was no turning back. The answers waited in the church, and he and Max were ready to face whatever lay ahead. With Grace's diary in hand, Ethan felt the weight of every word, as though he carried a burden that only the truth could lift. He knew he had to return to the church, where every thread of the mystery seemed to converge. Accompanied by Max, Ethan walked through the narrow village streets. Each step heightened his adrenaline and sharpened his resolve. He had to find the metal box Grace had mentioned in her journal. It was the key waiting to be uncovered. Arriving at the church, Ethan scanned his surroundings to ensure no one was watching. The space was shrouded in silence, the doors slightly ajar, darkness pooling inside like a quiet warning. Steeling himself, Ethan pushed the doors open and stepped in cautiously, with Max close at his side. He recalled the photograph, the metal box hidden beneath an old statue. Moving slowly, Ethan made his way toward the statue of a saint tucked in a shadowed corner of the church. The stone figure exuded an air of solemn authority, its stern gaze almost as if it guarded something significant. Kneeling down, his hands trembling slightly, Ethan began searching around the base of the statue, feeling for anything unusual. His fingers brushed against something, a hidden crevice. There was something there. Peeling away a small cloth draped at the base of the statue, Ethan revealed the metal box Grace had written about. His heart pounded in his chest as he exchanged a glance with Max, whose wagging tail seemed to convey, "We're on the right track." Carefully, Ethan lifted the box, its cold surface heavy in his hands. Taking a deep breath, he unlatched the lid and opened it. Inside were neatly bundled stacks of cash, each roll tied tightly and labeled with handwritten notes detailing donation amounts from parishioners. The sums were staggering, far beyond what any small village church should possess. But there was more. Beneath the bundles of cash lay a small key. Picking it up, Ethan held it under the faint light streaming through the stained glass windows. The key was simple, unassuming, but its significance felt enormous. "What does this unlock?" Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. Turning the key over in his hand, he could feel himself drawing closer to the truth. He looked at Max, who tilted his head expectantly, as if urging him onward. Clutching the key tightly, Ethan muttered to himself, "This is it. This has to lead to the final piece." The stillness of the church pressed down on him, but he knew there was no turning back. The key in his hand was not just an object. It was a door to uncovering the full extent of what Grace had sacrificed everything to reveal. As Ethan carefully unfolded the old, yellowed paper hidden beneath the stacks of money, he revealed a map. A single location was circled in red ink. Next to the circle, a handwritten note stood out, "Church Archives." The realization hit him immediately. This key must unlock the door to the church's hidden archives. This must be where Grace discovered something, he whispered, a mix of fear and hope rising in his chest. Clutching the key tightly, he turned to Max, who wagged his tail in readiness. "Let's go, boy. We're going to find the truth." Rising to his feet, Ethan began searching the church for the marked location, following the map's instructions. The oppressive silence in the church seemed to grow heavier with every step, as though the very building was holding its breath, waiting for the secrets within to be revealed. The map led them to a small, inconspicuous door hidden behind the altar, a door few would have noticed. A shiver ran down Ethan's spine as he approached. The air here was colder, denser, as though something dark and ancient lingered just beyond. He inserted the key into the lock, pausing to steady his breathing. With a sharp click, the lock turned, and the door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Gripping a flickering flashlight in one hand, Ethan began his descent, Max following closely behind, his ears perked, alert to every sound. The stone steps were cold underfoot, and the faint echoes of their movements added to the unsettling atmosphere. At the bottom of the staircase, they entered a damp, shadowy corridor. The air was thick and stale, the walls slick with moisture. At the far end, a faint light flickered, casting unsteady shadows on the rough stone walls. Suddenly, a sound pierced the silence, the faint clinking of chains. "Grace?" Ethan called softly, his voice trembling. Only the echo of his own voice replied, bouncing eerily off the corridor's walls. He pressed forward, the light growing stronger with each step until they reached a small room dimly illuminated by a single, swaying bulb hanging from the ceiling. And there, in the center of the room, he saw her. Grace was alive, though pale and frail, her wrists shackled to the arms of an old wooden chair. "Grace!" Ethan exclaimed, his voice breaking with relief. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing weakly on him. A faint, hoarse whisper escaped her lips. "Ethan, you found me." Overwhelmed, Ethan rushed forward, pulling at the chains binding her. Max barked, standing guard as though anticipating danger. "What happened to you?" Ethan asked urgently, his voice low but insistent. Grace winced, struggling to speak. "It's all true. The corruption, the money, everything. He didn't want anyone to know." "Who, Grace? Who did this to you?" Ethan pressed, though in his heart he already knew the answer. Her lips parted, but before she could respond, a loud creak echoed from the staircase behind them. Footsteps. Someone was coming. Grace's faint voice whispered, "Ethan." But before Ethan could move closer, heavy footsteps thundered from behind. Spinning around, he saw Father Daniel, gripping a wooden plank tightly, his face contorted with rage. "You shouldn't be here," Father Daniel bellowed, his voice distorted by fury. "I told you, you'd never find Grace." Before Ethan could react, Father Daniel lunged, swinging the plank with brutal force. Ethan barely managed to sidestep, but the blow grazed his shoulder, throwing him off balance and sending him crashing to the cold, damp floor. Disoriented, Ethan raised his hands in a feeble attempt to defend himself, his mind reeling with disbelief. How could a priest, a symbol of peace and compassion, do this? As Ethan struggled to comprehend the situation, Father Daniel loomed over him, raising the plank for another strike. But before the blow could land, Max let out a ferocious bark and charged at Father Daniel, sinking his teeth into the man's leg with unyielding determination. A scream of pain tore from Father Daniel's throat, echoing through the basement. He stumbled, desperately trying to shake Max off, but the dog held firm, his loyalty and protective instincts unwavering. In his frantic struggle, Father Daniel dropped the plank, which clattered to the floor. Seeing his chance, Ethan scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding. He couldn't let Father Daniel escape, not with the truth so close to being exposed. As Father Daniel staggered backward, attempting to flee, Max released his grip but stayed close, barking furiously to keep him cornered. Ethan pursued him out of the basement and onto the village street. The commotion had drawn the attention of the villagers, who began emerging from their homes, their faces etched with confusion and concern. They stared in shock at the scene unfolding before them. Father Daniel, revered and respected, now disheveled and panicked, being pursued by Ethan and restrained by the relentless Max amid the growing crowd. Ethan seized the moment, his voice ringing with urgency. "Stop! Everyone needs to hear the truth." He stood tall, his voice steady but impassioned as he recounted everything. The hidden box of embezzled money, the discovery of Grace in chains, and the dark deeds Father Daniel had committed to keep his secrets buried. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd as the villagers struggled to process the shocking revelations. Their disbelief gave way to outrage as the weight of Ethan's words sank in. In a last, desperate bid to escape, Father Daniel tried to break free. But Max, ever vigilant, lunged once more, pinning the priest in place. A few of the village men, finally moved to action, stepped forward to help subdue Father Daniel, restraining him as he shouted incoherently, his voice cracking under the pressure of his exposed sins. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, anger and betrayal mingling in their voices. Ethan stepped back, letting the villagers take control, his focus shifting to Grace, still in the church basement. "We need to help Grace," Ethan said firmly, glancing at the villagers, some of whom nodded and rushed toward the church. The facade of the peaceful village had cracked, and its darkest secrets were spilling out for all to see. With Father Daniel restrained, Ethan knew it was time to present the evidence that would end the facade for good. Leading the villagers back into the church, his hands still trembling, Ethan opened the metal box in front of them. All eyes fixed on the embezzled money and the map that led to the secret room, the place where Father Daniel's illicit activities had been concealed. The air was thick with shock and anger as the truth finally came to light. Determined to make everything clear, Ethan guided the villagers to the hidden archive where Grace was still chained. As the group entered the room, Grace's initial fear gave way to visible relief upon seeing familiar faces. Max, sensing the resolution of their mission, wagged his tail energetically, his satisfaction evident in his joyful demeanor. With Father Daniel subdued and his crimes laid bare, it seemed the mystery had reached its conclusion. But deep inside, Ethan knew that Father Daniel was not the kind of man to give up easily. As the villagers debated what to do next, a momentary lapse in vigilance gave Father Daniel the opportunity he was waiting for. In a desperate move, he broke free from his captors. Hatred and fear burned in his eyes as he snatched a wooden plank from the ground. "You don't understand anything," he bellowed, his voice filled with rage. "You should have stayed out of this." He charged toward Ethan, the plank raised high, his furious gaze locked on his target. For a moment, Ethan froze, his mind paralyzed by the surreal image of a priest, once a symbol of faith and morality, consumed by violence and hatred. Before the blow could land, Max sprang into action. The dog lunged at Father Daniel, his teeth sinking into the man's leg with unrelenting force. A scream of pain tore from Father Daniel's throat, echoing through the village square as he collapsed to the ground, thrashing in an attempt to free himself. Ethan, shaken out of his shock, rushed forward to intervene. He pulled at Father Daniel, trying to separate him from Max, But the struggle quickly escalated into a chaotic scuffle. Villagers shouted in alarm, their voices mingling with Max's growls and Father Daniel's cries. In a final act of desperation, Father Daniel managed to free himself from Max for a brief moment. Limping and panicked, he bolted toward the village square, his steps uneven but driven by sheer will to escape. But Max was relentless. The dog chased after him, barking loudly, his determination unwavering. Within seconds, Max leaped with a burst of strength, bringing Father Daniel down in the middle of the square. The villagers gasped as they watched the once revered priest subdued by the loyal dog, unable to escape his fate. Breathing heavily, Ethan caught up and stood over Father Daniel, who now lay defeated. Pinned to the ground by Max, the square fell silent as the villagers gathered around, their faces a mix of shock, anger, and disbelief. This was the end of the facade. The man they had trusted was exposed, and the darkness that had haunted their village was finally brought to light. The villagers, drawn out of their homes by the commotion, now gathered in the square, their eyes wide with shock at the scene before them. None of them could have imagined that Father Daniel, once revered as a symbol of kindness and faith, would find himself in such a humiliating and desperate situation. Still catching his breath, Ethan stepped forward to address the crowd. He took a deep, steadying breath before speaking, his voice firm despite the weight of the revelations he was about to share. Grace discovered the truth about Father Daniel, that he embezzled money donated by the congregation and used it for dark and selfish purposes. To silence her, he kidnapped her to keep her from revealing the truth. The words hit the crowd like a thunderclap. Gasps and murmurs of disbelief rippled through the villagers. The man they had trusted so implicitly was now exposed as a fraud and a criminal. A few of the men stepped forward to restrain Father Daniel, their expressions grim. Ethan, still resolute, motioned for the group to follow him back to the church. Inside the church, with the villagers gathered around, Ethan picked up the metal box, his hands still trembling, not from the physical weight, but from the gravity of the truth he was about to reveal. He opened the box for all to see, exposing the neatly bundled stacks of cash. Each roll was labeled with the names of those who had donated, a stark reminder of the betrayal they had suffered. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, followed by murmurs of shock and anger. The undeniable evidence of Father Daniel's crimes lay before them, shattering the trust they once held in him. "I found this key inside the box," Ethan said, holding it up for all to see. "It unlocks a secret room beneath the church, a room where Grace was held captive." With the villagers trailing behind him, Ethan led them to the hidden archive. He inserted the key into the lock and pushed the door open, revealing the damp, shadowy room below. Inside, they found Grace, weak but alive, still chained to the chair. A collective sigh of relief swept through the crowd, and a few villagers moved to help free her. "Grace, you're safe now," Ethan said softly, his voice full of reassurance. Grace, though exhausted, managed a faint smile, her eyes filling with tears of relief. She couldn't believe it was finally over. Max, the loyal dog who had never wavered, ran to her side, wagging his tail furiously. His joyful bark seemed to echo the collective sentiment. She was safe, and justice was within reach. The crowd stood in stunned silence, their eyes shifting from Grace, who was now surrounded by those tending to her, to Father Daniel, whose lies and crimes had been laid bare for all to see. The mood was a mixture of overwhelming relief and lingering disbelief. Many villagers wiped tears from their eyes, overcome by the emotional weight of the moment. Others stared at Father Daniel, with expressions of anger and betrayal, their trust shattered. As the truth sank in, the villagers knew that their once quiet village would never be the same. But in that moment, they also knew justice would be served, and the darkness that had loomed over them would no longer hold them captive. Father Daniel, now fully exposed, tried desperately to justify his actions, his voice pleading and frantic. But the villagers, once loyal and trusting, no longer wanted to hear his excuses. The man they had once revered was unmasked, and the undeniable evidence spoke louder than his hollow words. No one listened as he stammered for forgiveness or sought to explain. The proof of his deceit, the embezzled funds, the secret room, and Grace's captivity, was laid bare before their eyes. Ethan and Max had pulled back the curtain on the darkness that had lurked behind the priest's facade. With Father Daniel arrested and the full truth revealed, the mystery was resolved, and justice had been served. Grace, her eyes brimming with gratitude, turned to Ethan and Max. Her voice trembled with emotion as she said, "Thank you for risking everything to save me and to bring the truth to light." As Father Daniel was led away in handcuffs, the villagers stood in silence, their shock palpable. Though the betrayal was profound, they resolved to rebuild their community on a foundation of honesty and trust. The darkness that had plagued their village was finally lifted. In the weeks that followed, the villagers banded together to heal from the wounds left by Father Daniel's betrayal. They committed to fostering transparency and unity, vowing to never again allow such deception to take root. Ethan, having found both purpose and belonging through his ordeal, decided to stay in the village. He devoted himself to helping Grace recover, their shared experience forging a bond of trust and friendship. Over time, he became an integral part of the community, using his insight and determination to support the villagers' efforts to rebuild. Max, the loyal companion whose bravery had played a pivotal role, became a beloved figure in the village. Children gathered around him, laughing and playing, while adults praised and petted him, recognizing his heroism. The villagers celebrated Max as a true hero, a symbol of loyalty and courage. Through sacrifice and bravery, the village found a renewed sense of hope. United by the truth and strengthened by their shared commitment to integrity, they began a new chapter, one built on trust, honesty, and solidarity. Ethan, Max, and Grace became symbols of the village's rebirth, their story a reminder of the power of courage and the importance of standing against injustice, no matter the cost. From the ashes of betrayal, the village rose stronger, ready to face the future with hearts full of hope and eyes wide open to the truth. This story serves as a powerful reminder of the strength of truth, courage, and loyal friendship. Have you ever faced challenges to stand up for what is right? Share your story in the comments. Your voice could inspire others to overcome difficulties and fight for justice. If you found this story meaningful, don't hesitate to share it with your friends and family to spread the message of honesty and bravery. Thank you for following the story to the end and for supporting us. Be sure to hit like and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss upcoming heartfelt and inspiring stories. Every small action you take helps spread these positive values to those around you. Wishing you happiness, health, and endless inspiration. Thank you for supporting our channel. Like, share, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest content. These stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared to promote humanity's values and have been rewritten with AI assistance. If there are any inaccuracies, we ask for your kind understanding. Wishing you all the best in life.